Okay. So we were playing black here. So yeah, did you have any questions on this opening? Like any moves you weren't sure about?
So up to here, I'm fine, but then I was expecting them to take the pawn, and then when they didn't take the pawn and they go here, because I spoke about the Grunfeld yesterday, and Danny said that c5 is quite important for beginning to put pressure on d4. So I was looking. I know that if they take and then I take, I know where to go from there.
Mm-hmm.
But then when they didn't take, and then I wasn't sure how to work out if I could play c5, and I wasted I was here for like 3 minutes trying to work out if I could play c5, and I decided that I couldn't, and I castled, and then when I looked at the engine, it said that I could just play anyway. So that was a waste of 3 minutes.
Right.
It's awful.
Yeah, it's especially if we spend a lot of time, we don't play the move, then it's like, right, you could have just castled very quickly and been fine. But let's discuss this move, because this is going to happen, a lot. Like people are just going to make not necessarily random moves. I wouldn't say b3 is a random move. To me, it's like very logical. You're attacking the pawn, they defend the pawn. Like it's definitely not the best move according to theory, but it certainly has some sense to it. Let's talk just a little bit about, like the goal of the opening. It's generally just to get our pieces out, get our king castled safely, and to fight for the center. So that's kind of exactly what you're doing with this d5 move. You're fighting for squares in the center, and you're already ready to castle. So what is the idea just generally behind playing c5? What would you say?
Well, it's because of their d4 pawn. I'm trying to put pressure on d4 with c5, and also lets me bring my knight out. I've got the bishop looking at that, and they can't take, because if they do, then hopefully this knight's out of the way, and then I'm able to come in and sometimes get a fork here.
Right. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. I mean, basically, you're putting pressure on their center. The move also kind of lines up nicely with the rest of your pieces because, it coordinates with your bishop that wants to just do work on this diagonal. So then, okay, like we understand the idea. Then it comes down to just like the move by move calculation. So let me ask, what kind of discouraged you from playing this move? Because it definitely looks like a really natural one.
Because I thought that they could just take it basically, and then I have nowhere to go really. Like I can take back here, I can push the pawn forward, and it's because this knight is kind of preventing me coming in as well. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure why I didn't do it. I'm not sure why I spent 3 minutes on it, but I was just scared of, because I know that when they take my d pawn with their c pawn, like it's relatively safe for me to go here, because then my bishop can get in for this pin, but my knight's blocking my bishop. So then I was thinking that they could just take this for free essentially.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, let's take a look at it. Let's say you did play c5 and they did take. Let's just talk about like possible follow-ups to this move, because this move often is, let's call it like a pseudo pawn sacrifice or a temporary sacrifice, because I think you will get the pawn back if you kind of like follow up accurately, but it requires, let's say, finding some key ideas. So some moves that often work, they're not going to work necessarily 100% of the time white takes on c5, but like typical ideas, number one is to bring the queen out to a5. So let's just take a look at this one. Here the point is, all right, you're attacking the knight. That's kind of your biggest threat, but you're also attacking the pawn and just wanting to win back the pawn with your queen, where you've equalized the material and you've kind of achieved your goal, which is to open up this bishop on the long diagonal. And long term, you're going to be looking to get the knight out of the way, maybe actively with knight e4 and opening it up. I would say, let's say the safest move for white here is bishop d2, like defending the knight and also getting white out of this pin. Let's say, for example, white played bishop b2. Are you familiar with what a pin is?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So basically, knight is pinned here to the king, and this is where black would want to put more pressure on this knight. So let me throw it to you. What move could black find here that puts a lot of pressure on this knight?
Knight to e4?
Exactly right. Yeah, absolutely. And not only are we attacking with our knight, we've also opened up our bishop. All of a sudden, it's actually big problems for white after this move, because now we have 3 attackers, queen, knight, and bishop. White only has 1 defender, and white has 1 move to add 2 defenders to the knight, which is very hard to do. So already here, I think we're winning the piece. Maybe we could take a look at it just to confirm, but let's say white defends. Then we're taking once, and we're taking the second time. And if white wants to give the rook, we're fine with that. And in the end, we've ended up with pretty much extra rook in the position. 2 minor pieces each, 1 queen each, but 2 rooks versus 1. So this is clear. This knight e4 idea can be very strong. But let's say they go bishop d2. Now knight e4 is not going to work as well, because what can white do here?
They can take the knight with their c knight.
Yeah, simply take, and we don't have any time to grab the rook because our own queen is hanging. So this would actually be very bad for black.
Bad.
So on bishop d2, I would say, well, now we can, let's say, execute our second threat, which is just to win back the pawn. And you've kind of, let's say, justified your c5 push. We still have d5 defended, so if white goes c takes d5, we can recapture this one. And then if knight takes d5, this actually may be a good little calculation exercise. Calculation, I think, is just, one of the most important things in chess. Like, you can play good opening, bad opening, but being able to calculate is going to kind of trump all. So we have 2 options here as black. We can either recapture the knight, or we can consider taking the rook first. So which of these do you think would be better?
If we take the rook, they can take back with the queen, and they're threatening our rook again.
Right.
So it seems bad. So I would take the knight.
Yeah, very good. Exactly. Like, okay, the rook is kind of more material, but yeah, when they take back, they're hitting the rook on h8. If we could take this one, and then let's say take on d5, and then white didn't have anything here, that would be great. We're up material, but of course, rook is hanging. So yeah, just queen takes d5. We recapture this one, and yeah, I would say our position looks totally fine. Bishop is open. We can castle next move. You can get your knight out, actively to c6. Other bishop can develop as well. Rooks come to the center, and yeah, once we get all of our pieces out, we're definitely going to be quite happy here as black. Any questions on this?
No, that seems fine.
Cool. So yeah,
I'm not really sure why to be honest, I'm not really sure why I decided that c5 was not playable, but I guess I just calculated all that wrong. It seems like it's as simple as that, I guess.
No, I mean, if they're taking a pawn and you don't see exactly what you're getting for it, then it's not really a move you should make, in my opinion, right? Like, if you're not sure like why you're giving up a pawn in the first place.
I didn't even know that like queen a5 was an option here. I guess that's knowing that is good.
Yeah, well, right. I mean, chess is definitely a game of like ideas, and I would say like pattern recognition is very important. And this is one of those things. It's like once you see it, and once you have someone like tell you like, all right, look for queen a5 to justify, it becomes a lot easier. Now it's like, let's say we switch the position up a little bit. Let's say white plays e3, which is also, I would say, a very common move. And we try c5 here as black. White takes. Then hopefully next time you're consider this move as well. Now, it doesn't seem as strong because the knight on c3 is defended. White hasn't moved their b pawn. But if we just take a look at this one, it's very difficult for white to defend this pawn anyway. Basically, no pieces can really get to it. Now, white can take this pawn on d5.
They could bring the queen out there, could they not? To d4?
Oh, good point. Honestly, I didn't even notice this move. All right, queen d4. That defends the pawn. Let's think about how we would continue here as black. What would you want to do?
Moving the f6 knight. Oh, no, it's bad. Could go c6 with our knight.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, you have the right instincts here. Like your opponent brings the queen out, like we want to attack it with our pieces, especially if we can like develop the piece, which the knight wants to go here anyway, and we get a nice tempo on the queen because white has to respond. And now, yeah, the queen is going to have to give up protection. And we just take the pawn. We got a knight move for free. Now, we could have done, let's say, this one as well, because we defend the bishop.
Ah, right.
But
yeah, I miss those like knight to the edge moves a lot, just because I've kind of got it drilled into me that generally having the knights on the edge is bad. So
that is a good.
They can become easy to miss.
Yeah, that's one of those things you'll learn in chess. Like, there's a lot of very useful principles and a lot of situations where like they don't necessarily apply. That said, though, like if we just take a look at this move, like, okay, we got the tempo on the queen, but the knight doesn't really want to be on h. We're just putting it here because we need to defend the bishop, but it would much rather be back in the center on f6. So this is not really a move like we would want to make, and eventually we might have to lose a move with the knight. Whereas knight c6, that's a move we want to make whether or not we hit the queen. That's just like a nice move to get in. So yeah, basically it's very hard for white to hold on to this pawn. So much so that a lot of times, some players will even just castle and they just leave the pawn hanging, and they know that they're always going to be able to play queen a5 and pick up the pawn. Or another move black often plays is like even knight to a6. So this is another kind of exception. Like, okay, we're putting the knight on the side of the board, but the point is that the knight isn't going to stay here. Your idea is to just take with the knight on c5 and activate it this way. So let me adjust that guideline for you. You can put knights on the edge of the board, I would say, let's say for two reasons. Number one, if it's just concretely good, like if putting the knight on the edge of the board wins you a queen, because they have a king and a queen and you're forking them, then that's probably going to be good. And the second guideline is like if the knight has a very clear path, back to the center, you know exactly how you're going to get it back into the center, then it's not going to take that long for that knight to get there. This is also going to be like okay in a lot of cases.
Yep.
All right, so we end up castling anyway, which let me just say, like, if you had just castled without thinking too much about it, I would say totally fine. Like, this is a move we want to make. The king is safer on g8. It doesn't get caught in any checks or tactics. And then you can look to play the c5 move next. Like, your opponent's next move was g3. And if we look at c5 here, I would say a lot of the tactics work out very similarly. We still get our queen a5 move. We have ideas to play knight e4 and put pressure on the knight. And yeah, black is still doing.
I think the problem was that once I calculated not to go c5 on the previous move and I went to castle, then I'd basically calculated c5 as bad, and then their move g3 doesn't really change that at all. So I had basically no intention of going g5 on that move, and it's kind of a snowbally problem once I miscalculate that, because it makes me miss it on this turn as well, because there's no point in me calculating that again because the board state hasn't really changed. Yeah. So I'm just going to assume it's bad again, right?
I mean, I think that makes sense, and that's probably good for your time management. The worst thing would be to like spend another 2 minutes and then decide like again you don't want to play it. So to me that makes sense. Once you've made the decision once, I think yeah, you should just continue like with what you'd like to do. So knight e4, honestly fine. Takes. White goes knight e5. And now we play c5, I'm presuming because you're trying to undermine the knight.
Yeah.
Okay, so now still, yeah, very good move. White plays bishop b2, knight c6. So we trade the knights, and white goes bishop g2. And I think I was watching around here. So you were considering this move, queen a5 check.
Yep.
And take me through your thought process on this one. Well, because I know you decided against it, but what exactly didn't you like here?
Well, I didn't like that my pawn was hanging. I was not. I want the reason why I wanted to move the queen out with check was because if they block with the queen, I would be happy to trade, and also I want to get this rook to d8 eventually, or at least one of the rooks, just so that I can sort this pawn structure out in the middle and have either the rook, if once I've went queen to a5, if the queen trades do happen, then the rook will be on like a semi-open file, and if the queen trade does not happen, the rook will be looking at the queen.
Okay, but then, I mean, that makes sense. But you're saying you're worried about your e4 pawn?
Yes.
So if we do go queen a5 check, and yeah, let's say white goes queen d2, because otherwise they have to move their king. Let's say we trade this one, king takes d2. So here we would have a move to figure out what we want to do about our pawn on e4.
Yeah, I can just block it with a bishop or push my f pawn, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, let's say, honestly, I think either move makes sense. Let's say f5, just to give yourself kind of like a nice pawn chain. And you still have this really annoying pin on the bishop on b2. So let's say, all right, we're threatening to take this pawn. Let's say white defends it with e3. How would you continue here?
I would probably take or just move the rook as planned.
Okay, so yeah, these are good options.
Yeah, I would probably move the rook, I guess.
Okay, I definitely like this move. But let's analyze why is taking actually not as good? Because I think you're right, it's not as good, but why exactly is that?
Because they take back, and then I still have a pin on the bishop, but I have one less attacker, so I can't really make use of that.
Well, let's say we traded, and then we get our second pawn. It's actually a nice little operation because it's like you traded off one attacker for one defender, but then you get the second c pawn. So it's almost like you didn't lose any attackers. But now white has one less defender on d4.
Yeah, so it's actually good.
It's not bad. Although I would say, game continues. White probably goes king to e3 and defends this way. And if we continue, let's say, piling up on the pawn, then white can also get their rook in. And let's say maybe white is kind of holding here. So I actually like your rook move better because when you play rook to d8 here, white's king is still like in the way, and white doesn't have time to bring anything in because now we're threatening. We got 3 attackers on this one. White only has 2 defenders, the pawn and the bishop, and now it's actually pretty much impossible for white to defend this pawn. So yeah, this looks really nice for black. Looks like we're just going to be taking on d4 here. I don't know, white gets the king out of the way. We can take, and we win a nice pawn, and then have like a big advantage from there. And then actually, just to continue the line, let's say white goes rook to d1 and offers a rook trade. What would be black's options here?
Or you can take the rook or push c-pawn to defend it.
Yeah.
I'd probably push the pawn.
And why do you like this one better?
Because if I take, they take back with their rook and they're on the open file.
Yeah, exactly. And if they take here, then you get your pawn to d4, and pawn is really strong in the center. You can advance d3, you can support it with e5. Your pawns in the center are very nicely defended, and yeah, I think give black a big advantage. Okay, so that's a very like important point, and I'm glad you have this instinct to play c5. Like whenever we consider trades, we always want to see like, can we trade on our terms? Like trade in a way that improves our position. So I'm glad that's pretty natural for you. So, okay, long story short, I think this was very doable. Now we end up taking on d4 right away, and then white takes on e4. So we kind of trade pawns. But I think the key idea here that would have given you like a big advantage, just as in the endgame, like after king takes d2, we could have taken the pawn and then given up on e4. We came up with this move f5, which basically like defends our weakness. Now e4 is defended, but leaves white with this hanging pawn. So this is like kind of like a typical, let's say, strategy. Like both sides have their weaknesses, but if you can defend your pawn and leave the d4 pawn hanging, then it's actually very, very unpleasant for white, because now white has to figure out how to defend this one. Maybe something like e3, and then we can continue putting pressure, like with queen b6 or queen a5 and rook d8 and so on. Okay, let's go on. So takes queen b6, rook d8. I thought these moves are great. Then white plays e3, and yeah, I thought your time management here was good. Like you spent a little bit of time calculating here, but you simply noticed like, okay, you're taking a pawn and you're hitting their queen. Tactically, it looks very good. So we go for it, and then you took on f2, which I really loved, because it shows that you're not just kind of on autopilot. You're like considering every position, and you see that you can grab another pawn with check and then take the bishop anyway. So this was great. And let's see. So we went bishop g4, rook d7. Okay, here's where the game starts to get really tricky.
Yeah.
Now let me see. What was our time?
I think I've not got a lot of time left already here.
Yeah, exactly. Now you're down to 1 minute. So that's very tough, especially without increment. We talked a little off stream. So my recommendation would be to try to practice with the 5-second increment, because I think you're going to be in this position a lot where you're kind of like winning or ahead. You're going to be behind on time, and if you're able to just like make reasonable moves on the increment, then I think you convert these almost all the time.
Do you think it's fine to play those games even if I do get matched with like significantly stronger players? And I know I can play against people in chat, but like even if I'm playing off stream, like I should be queuing up these games even if like the majority of my opponents were, I've tried it before, and the majority of the opponents were like 13 to 1500, I would say, which it's not too bad, but I think that's a little bit better than what my opponents in PogChamps will be generally.
Right. Yeah.
Which, I mean, it's not terrible to practice against better players, I guess.
Yeah, it's definitely not ideal, but yeah, I would say like 300-400 points. It's not definitely like not insurmountable. Like I can totally see you winning games against that level as well. Ideally, yeah, you're playing someone closer to your range, but if you're playing some stronger players and they outplay you, like I think that's just going to be an instructive game, so that'll be useful.
Yeah.
But at the same time, yeah, you don't just want to be like losing all your games in training. That's not good for your confidence. So definitely, like, it would be nice to just get a balance or play players that are closer to your range. I would say, I mean, another thing you can do is you can play like 5+5. So you might get some players closer to you that way. And then, because the main thing is just to kind of practice playing
Having
with
the
the 5
increment.
seconds.
Yeah.
Especially like, yeah, you have a good position and you want to have that confidence that like, you could have 10 seconds left on your clock with the 5-second increment. And if it's like an end game, you know how to win, then you'll be able to convert it. I mean, even against like anyone in the world, like not even just players who are slightly higher than you, but even players like much higher than you, if you feel confident you can win a certain end game on the increment, then I think that's really important.
Yeah. By far the most like common blunder I'm making in my games is in the end game when I'm low on time and I'm just like my opponent's getting to kind of sweep up some pawns with their rooks that I don't think I would make those mistakes if I had a bit more time.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is where it's like just the practical aspect comes in. In like classical chess, of course, you have like 90 minutes on your clock. It's very comfortable. Yeah. You can spend tons of time, but yeah, rapid is much more of a game, let's say, like where you really gotta be careful with the time management. So, well, yeah, I mean, looking at this position now, maybe you could try to find what you should have done at this point.
I remember what my move actually was. So there's just so much stuff to defend here. Like these two pawns are both getting attacked. Oh, I could have just taken the rook, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Like,
yeah,
in the heat of the battle, I think it's very easy, let's say, to be reactive.
Okay.
But this, of course, okay, this is, let's say, like tactical skill, just noticing. Although backwards moves, they say, are some of the hardest to see, which makes sense because our brains are kind of prompted to always kind of look forward and look to make aggressive moves. And okay, with low time again, it's just hard to like keep the board straight. I mean, it happens to literally players of all levels. Like once the time ticks down, your stress level goes up, and the board starts to even get like a little fuzzy. Like you just don't see everything as clearly as you normally would. So yeah, of course we could have done better at this phase, but I would say the main thing is just being able to avoid getting super low on time in the first place. Okay, so let's see. There's a few things I wanted to work with you on. Let me ask you about some endgames, if that's cool.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. Are we familiar with how to checkmate with a king and a queen against king?
Yes.
All right.
I think.
I'll take your word for that one. How about king and rook?
King and rook, yes.
Okay. Maybe we could play this one out real quick.
Okay.
I'll have you.
It might take me more moves than it needs to, but I think I can get it.
Yeah, as long as it's under 50, that's fine.
Okay.
So you should be able to make moves for white.
All right, not a great start.
You're still fine.
I know conceptually what to do, but like forcing you to do that is a bit harder.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, talk me through that. What is your plan here?
I'm trying to get your king to the corner, get my king here, or essentially to protect these two squares, and then the rook's just coming in.
Okay, cool. So yeah, first step is to like kind of push the king into the corner.
Yeah, that's the hardest part, I think.
It is. Okay, good. I'll go here. Nice.
Is that wrong?
No, good move.
Seems fine.
Yeah, I mean, basically you're taking away squares.
Yeah.
And I refer to this as like kind of the the box method. Like your rook is creating this box for the king.
Yep, I heard about the box method like 2 days ago, and it's really made it a lot easier.
Awesome. Yeah, to me, it's the most, like, there are different ways to do it, but to me, this is the most intuitive. Like, when it comes to all these end games, it's really just more important to just understand, like, conceptually what you're trying to do rather than trying to, let's say, memorize all the right moves, because the situation will be different every time, and it's so easy to misremember. But if you understand what you're aiming for with your pieces, then becomes a lot easier to just kind of work it out every time. Okay,
My
good.
king has to go there, right?
Yeah, that's a very good move because you can't really make progress with the rook. So so what we call like a waiting move. You just do nothing, but now black has to make a move, and I have to give some ground. So I'll play here. Nice. All right, go here.
This is where it gets a bit spooky.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I wish I knew this stuff like just immediately, but I do have to kind of like think through it, but which is a bit annoying. But I think it's just given that I don't have a ton of time to practice everything, I think just getting my brain to the point where I can work it out is good enough for now.
Yeah. You're doing great. It's it just takes a little bit of practice. So like I would recommend playing this out. Like on chess.com they have these endgame drills where you can play all these positions out like against the engine. I would recommend doing that like a couple times just so you get like the, let's say like the muscle memory for it. Very nice. So yeah, I mean, you did that one like really well. Like 16 moves is great. The key question is, would you be able to do it like on the increment? Because like that might be a situation you get in. You know, you're winning, you have king and rook, you know you can checkmate, but you have like, 10 seconds on your clock, 5-second increment.
Mm-hmm. Can I not just kind of move pieces around randomly to get time though, and then once I've got a bit more of a buffer, kind of go towards the checkmate? Like, because I don't think I'd be able to do that with only having 5 seconds a move, but I think I can just like buy myself some time, like cheese it a little bit.
You can a little bit, but like the issue with that is, so there's this like 50 move rule, right? So if you make 50 moves without a pawn move or a capture, then the game is declared drawn.
Mm-hmm.
So with more pieces on the board, like let's say you had, let's just say you have, I'll put sample position, king, rook. Your opponent has king, rook, and you've got 2 extra pawns. So this is also a position where you're winning, but if you have low time, then your strategy makes a lot of sense. You just make some very safe moves with the rook, keep everything defended. You make like 10 moves, you get 40, 50 seconds, and then you have time to actually think. The nice thing there is as soon as you make a pawn move, this like 50 move counter resets. So you don't have to worry. With just the king and rook, then it's like, all right, you have 50 moves to give mate here. If you mess around too much, then, suddenly you're like, okay, from 50 moves down to like now you have to mate in 30 moves, which is still very doable, but you won't be making up that much time. You'll have like a minute at that point or so.
Yeah.
So you're still going to have to do it like pretty quickly.
I get that. And I think if I had a month, I'd be able to just kind of learn it and get to the point that I can do it on the increment. But I'm really not sure I'd be able to do that without kind of devoting all of my remaining time to learning this.
Yeah, I think you might be right. It's
But,
not a
because
lot
I've
of
got to
time.
find a balancing act of, because we've got like 6 days left. I mean, it might be worthwhile because a lot of the games will get to a state like this, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, again, with the tournament coming up so quickly, we're going to have to make some sacrifices
Yeah.
in terms of what we look at. Yeah, I would say if you feel comfortable with the king and queen checkmate, that's probably enough. Getting to king and rook is, I would say, considerably rarer. Usually you just get a winning endgame, and then at some point you just have to promote a queen and checkmate with that. I do want to look at another endgame with you. Let's give you, oops, we gotta flip everything around here. Basically king and pawn against king. So a lot of endgames, when you trade down, you end up in a king and pawn endgame. Sometimes you have an extra pawn, sometimes you have equal pawns. But knowing how to promote your final pawn, let's say, I think another one of these like fundamental skills. And basically what you're doing is you're kind of like building a bridge for yourself. So like, you know how to checkmate with king and queen already. If you master being able to promote a pawn when you just have one left, then okay, that gets you the queen, and then you know how to win from there.
Yep.
So it's like slowly building out your base. Have you practiced this one at all?
A little bit, but I don't know how to do it. So
Okay, cool.
if I learned it, I've forgot it now.
Gotcha. Yeah, let me just try to give you just some key positions to kind of lock in, and hopefully that'll help you, because very unlikely you're going to get this exact position. You might get the pawn somewhere else, but if you kind of understand what you're playing for, I think that's the best thing. Okay, let me switch it up a bit. So key position to kind of understand is this one. Once the pawn, let's say, reaches pretty far down, the evaluation of this position is very straightforward. If it's white to move, white pushes d7, and black's king has to make a move, only one legal move. The king has to get out of the way of the pawn, nowhere else to go.
Yep.
And this allows white's king to advance. Once you get here, the pawn is promoting, your king is defending the square. Nothing black's king can do. In fact, let's say we have this position. The pawn is all the way back on the 5th rank, but white's king has assumed, we can call it the key square, where you're actually defending all 3 squares the pawn is going to. So I guess one of the most important concepts about king and pawn endgames is that the kings are often kind of like boxing with each other. They're fighting for the same squares, because your king takes squares away from the enemy king. So once you get a situation like this, your king has reached the 7th rank, you're basically done. In fact, you can pre-move the next 3 pawn moves. Like, there's just nothing black can do to stop you, nothing at all. So that's always kind of the goal in this endgame, is to get your king to the 7th rank, or if you're playing black, then getting the king to the 2nd rank. And once you do that, then the pawn is just escorted forward. So if we go back to this position, this is kind of the key thing. If we get the pawn to push, because here, of course, our king can't advance, then black's king is forced out of the way, our king comes in, and white wins. If we say it was black to move in this position, well, then black is going to continue fighting against white's king. This is something that is known as the opposition. It's a nice term to kind of keep in mind. Basically just means when the kings are lined up in front of each other. And here, basically, white's king can't progress. If white pushes the pawn anyway, black's king steps in front of the pawn. And now white's king only has one move to keep the pawn defended. That's king d6. And this is what we call stalemate. because black has no moves.
So you can't push the pawn.
Well, pushing the pawn leads to this stalemate. So black is drawing. But let's say white doesn't push the pawn. Let's say white tries to dance around with the king a little bit. Black is holding this one as long as black keeps the king in front of the pawn. So you might be on the defending side of this when you're playing against the pawn. And it's also just as important to know how to like best defend and prevent the opponent from promoting. The golden rule is keep your king in front of the pawn as much as you can. So here the right move would be king to d7. Let's say white plays here. So following this rule, like keeping the king in front of the pawn, where would black's move be?
D8.
D8, exactly. So this is something that hopefully gets like burned in as an instinct, just keeping the king in front of the pawn. The point of this one is that whenever white's king tries to, again, make progress, black's king is ready to meet white's king. So if white goes this way, we're playing here and preventing any progress. Once again, if white pushes the pawn, we're just stepping in front of it. And then we have the stalemate. And nothing white can really do as long as we're just keeping our king in front of the pawn. Everything makes sense so far?
Yeah, so like back to the original position, there's just no move for white to win then in that situation?
So at this one?
Yes.
Yeah, this one is a draw with best play. If black defends in the best possible way, black should hold the draw.
Okay.
So that's why these endgames are so important, because like one wrong move could be the difference between a win and a draw, or a draw and a loss. I would say it's kind of easier for the defender, because your job is just try to put your king in front of the pawn. And
yeah, so if the black king goes to d8 here instead of d7, they will lose, right?
So if it was, if it was black to move in this position, black would have to play here. And then we get this kind of key position with white to play, and white is able to force black out. And just to kind of clarify things, like when the kings are staring at each other, this is called the opposition. But whoever has to move is kind of in a bad spot.
They're giving up.
Exactly. Whoever turn it is, they have to get out of the way. So it's like one of the very few situations in chess, although there is quite a few of them, where it's like you want it to be your opponent's turn, because then they have to give ground in a certain way. Okay, so
what happened? What if the white king went to like e5 or something here, though, right? And then the black king goes to d7 to go in front of the pawn. Mm-hmm. That's still the same problem, huh? Wow.
This is a good question.
Just no solution.
So yeah, king d7, and then like white plays king d5. And so this feels like, well, white is the one that got the opposition. But this is where black's kind of extra move is so useful, because black plays king back, and white can't really keep taking the opposition. Their king has to go off to the side somewhere, and then the defender is ready.
And then black gets it, yeah.
Exactly.
Crazy.
So this is another one that's like really, really useful to practice, and I think we'll play it out a couple times just to give you, the feeling in your hand, because I think that's very important. It's so easy to like see endgames, and they make sense conceptually, but it's so different when you have like 30 seconds on your clock and you're under pressure, thousands of people watching, all this stuff. It's very easy to mess up something that you've seen many times before. Okay, so going back to this position, this has always been a funny one to me, because here the evaluation again depends on whosever turn it is. And if it's white to move, or the side with the extra pawn, they're able to win. If it's the defender's turn in this position, they're actually able to hold it. They're basically just in time. The key strategy for the stronger side is to get the king out in front of the pawn. And let me just demonstrate why that's so important. So let's say white brings their king out first. Black should probably just try to advance to get the king up as close as possible. And let's just say, for example, if Black was able to just teleport their king to, let's say, something like this, then here Black would already be holding pretty much for the same reason as before. It's very hard for White's king to advance. They have to push the pawn. Black's king stays in front of the pawn. And whenever White's king advances, Black is ready to take the opposition and prevent White from making any progress. And so if we just play this out, eventually we just get that final position. Black continues just keeping the king in front of the pawn. If White doesn't advance, let's say goes here, then we just keep the king in front of the pawn. And as soon as the king advances, we're always ready to block it. And yeah, basically only way to make progress is to keep pushing the pawn forward. The Black's king is always ready to block it.
Yep.
And then finally we get here, and Black has taken the opposition. We have the position kind of with the right moves. Okay, so that's why when you're the stronger side, it's really important to try to get the king out in front of the pawn. So let's see the difference here. Let's say Black continues moving forward, and White's king now steps in front of the pawn. So here the king has access to the square and actually takes the opposition, and now it's Black that has to get out of the way. And the really nice thing about keeping the pawn behind you, let's say just for some reason it was White to move in this position and White's king has to get out of the way. Well, White still has this move in reserve. So White would just advance this pawn, and now again it's Black to move, and White is the one that has the opposition. Black's king has to give ground. White's king is able to move forward. So let's see how that actually happens. So king has to choose a side. Let's say king goes here. Then White's king just wants to advance as far as possible. And here, hopefully, you're kind of recognizing this pattern where the king is just taking a lot of squares away.
Yep.
If the king tries to defend this way, then it's pretty much hopeless. The pawn is just moving forward. But the key thing is to keep our king active. So what happens very frequently in these endgames is White continues to push the pawn. This allows Black to get back in front of the pawn. And just like that, Black is again holding the draw, because now White's king has no way to advance. So instead, let me throw it to you now. What would be the right move for White in this position?
King e6.
King e6, exactly right. Just taking more squares with the king. Black's king can't do anything to approach our pawn. Okay, now let's say the king comes here. It can still get a little tricky, because if we continue advancing with our king, which looks very natural, well, then Black's king comes back up, and now our pawn can't advance, and Black is threatening to just play here and take the pawn. So White would have to come back, say, oops, excuse me, let me come back here. Black plays this one again, and now White basically has no choice but to advance the pawn. Black can get in front of the pawn, but notice the pawn is not advanced all the way. So what would be the move here for White?
King d6.
King d6, yeah. Very
Opposition.
good. Exactly. So White is taking the opposition. It's now Black to move. And anywhere Black goes, where does White go from here?
King e6.
So
No, king c7.
Yeah, very good. King e6 doesn't spoil anything. You're still winning, but exactly. The goal is to get the king to one of these squares.
Yep.
And then we're done. Then you pre-move from here and you build up some increment on the clock, and you can mate with the king and queen. Okay. So let's just kind of review. We want to keep the king in front of the pawn as much as we can. We want to take the opposition, but then the point of taking the opposition is that it simply just lets our king advance further, which lets our pawn advance. So king comes out first, pawn comes second. Any questions on that?
No. It's pretty simple to follow it right now. We'll see about when I've got 10 seconds on my clock. For now, it's fine.
Exactly. Well, let's practice now. Let's have you play White. I'll try to defend.
Trying to flip the board.
Yeah, go for it.
I can't move.
Oh, I'm sorry. Try again. All right, cool. Good. Nice.
Okay, I think I've messed up.
No, you're still fine. Mm-hmm. Nice.
Okay. What do you do here?
Good. Yeah, that's it, and we're done. Very nice.
Yeah.
So you're winning the whole time. I know you were a little bit, let's say, unsure at some of these moments, but that's fine. The important thing is just to think about it. Try not so much to, let's say, remember like, oh, what's the move supposed to be, but rather like just
Yeah, I think I'd
try to
rather like
understand.
be able to kind of work it out, you know.
Exactly. Okay, very good. Now let's see what happens if we're the defender. So as the defender side, we're just trying to advance the king, once again, keeping the king in front of the pawn as much as we can, and always getting ready to take the opposition when it's available. That's pretty much all you need to know. So let me just have you play black. And
So basically, as black, this is like completely lost, and I'm just trying to take advantage of a mistake.
it's actually, with black to move here, it is drawn with best play.
Okay.
Very good. So this is just the key move. Once you take the opposition, now it's actually very hard for white to do anything. Yeah. So even though the king is in front of the pawn, black has the opposition and simply no way for white to make progress. But okay, I'll try anyway. Mm-hmm.
One of these.
Mm-hmm.
I guess. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's got to
absolutely.
be here, right? If you push the pawn, I can take it, and if the king comes forward, you take opposition.
Right. I mean, honestly, the other move, this one also draws because, okay, white takes the opposition, but then you're in time to come here, and then there's not much white can do. But I would say the instinct should be to keep the king in front of the pawn. This one, very hard to go wrong this way. Okay, I'll keep trying. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well done.
Nice.
So, yeah, as you can see, I think you're playing pretty quickly at the end there. It's very intuitive as long as you just kind of
Yeah.
follow the guidelines. So hopefully we can hold it and save some important half points. Let me add some other pawns to the board just to kind of see other examples of pawn endgames. Let's see.
Yeah, the bar did go towards white in that one where I was defending with black at some point. I don't know if it said like mate in 20 or something. I don't know if I messed up. Or if that's just the eval bar is wrong. Which would be weird.
Yeah, no, you were definitely fine the whole time. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right, we have another. Let's call it like a typical endgame. A lot of times we have king and pawn endgames. The pawns get kind of locked up. And again, this one, it's all about the kings and how they fight against each other.
Yep.
So with white to play here, white wins with best play, and with black to play, black actually holds the draw. Let's start with black. Actually, what do you think would be the best move for black?
D7.
King d7, absolutely. And are you saying this one because we're taking the opposition?
Yeah.
Fair enough. I mean, this is often just like a really good instinct, and okay, here it also stops white from being able to advance. Okay, so with that in mind, let's say it's white to move. How do you think white can try and win here?
King C6.
King c6, very good. It's kind of like the only way to advance the king. I mean, it looks a little weird because it's like we're moving away from the pawns.
Yep.
But the nice thing about our position is like we kind of have more space, and our f5 pawn is doing a great job of taking this square away from black's king.
The black king can only go backwards, right?
Yeah, exactly. It has to give ground. So this is something in chess we refer to this. It's called outflanking, because you're kind of like attacking from the flank. I like to say shouldering. It's basically white's king is just going to be pushing black's king one move at a time. And yeah, if black could just like pass, like not make a move, which is one of the most interesting things about chess and endgames. Like a lot of positions are drawn if you could just say like, I don't want to move anything. I want to just stay as is. But because black has to make a move, they have to give ground. And that's just a very important principle. All right, so let's say black plays here. Let me have you continue from white. Right. Now the king comes in, and once again, Got to make a move. Yeah, and unfortunately for black, there's no way to
Defend the pawn.
keep the pawn defended, right? If we adjusted the position a little bit, let's say we put white's pawn back here, then black would actually still be fine. I could play here, and let's say you play here, I would play here, and the king has enough space. But since white is the one that's kind of advanced here, basically big problems for black. And let's just play this one out just to give you some more experience. Okay, should be white to move. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, let's play here. Very cool. And let's try to find the fastest mate. Nice. Beautiful. Also good was this one. Kind of pretty. Okay, so what we have here, or if we go back to the starting position, so this is kind of classic example of when having a more active king actually decides the game for white, even though it's equal material. Just having the more active king is actually a winning advantage. So actually, I'll show you a game. This is actually just played yesterday. We had like a sub battle, and there's a very nice endgame one. It seemed almost out of nowhere, but I thought it was pretty instructive. Basically, it was... Actually, it's not the exact position, but close enough. We had some position like this, and it was black to play. And black gives this check on g5 with the rook. And what white did was very smart. They responded with rook f5. And so what's the idea here? Well, white is now forcing a trade of rooks because the rook is pinned.
Yep.
And okay, black can try to get out of the pin, but then white is in time to trade rooks. And how would you evaluate this position?
Seems like easy win for white.
Easy win, exactly, yeah, because our king is just closer to the pawns and game over. And so this is like, let's say, typical example of when, you know, if you feel comfortable with king and pawn in games and you're able to evaluate them, and usually you can evaluate them based on the kings themselves, like whose king is more active, or if someone has a passed pawn, that's also going to be very important. This is one of the most important things about the endgame, is just understanding like who's doing better in the king and pawn endgame. And if you have a good king and pawn endgame, then your goal should be to like try to trade the last pieces, get to just the kings, and you can win from there.
So in that end game there, like before the black rook goes to g5, does black have any way to fight there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, good question. So black definitely can fight on in this endgame and has much better chances with the rooks on the board. It's just like a more dynamic position. And well, yeah, let me ask you, what do you think would be better for black?
I would just start trying to go after the pawns, so g3, a1, something like that.
Very good. I would say one of these moves is good, and the other one is definitely less good. Maybe you could try to figure out the difference.
G3 is good because the white rook can't block the pawn take easy.
Yeah, on that, with that logic, that's definitely a good move. And this is the one. Okay, let's say if I had 1 second on my clock, I would play this one over rook a1. Because, yeah, here white can't defend the pawn. If we played rook a1, then let's say white defends their weakness and then wants to come in with the king, and black is still in really big trouble because white's king is more active, and
yeah,
that's a big deal in the endgame. All right, in this exact position, so rook g3, let me just say, this is the move I was looking for. In this exact position, white has a very nice way to force a trade of rooks. So maybe you could try to find that as well.
This is f5 check.
So if you play rook f5, you're happy if black blocks, but let's say they move their king out of the way, we don't get the rook trade. But there is a way to force it, meaning with checks.
You can go h8, and then the king has to go to g file, and you pin the rook.
Yeah, exactly. So here white has this very nice idea, rook h8 check. Now, usually I'm not a fan of like random checks because often they just help the pieces get to where they want to go. But here, white is the one that gets to trade rooks, and then white is very happy because the king ends up more active in the end.
So that means that a1 is better than for the black rook in the original spot.
I guess, yeah, like given that we desperately don't want to trade rooks, technically a1 would be better. Though let's say black is in big trouble regardless, but maybe this is a slightly better try because at least you keep the rooks on the board. And then maybe if I was playing this position as black, I would try something like this to at least prevent white's king from being able to enter. But okay, game continues. White still has much better chances here, but at least it's not trivial for white, like which from the defender's point of view, it's kind of the best you're going to get is a situation where at least, you know, like white can't just like pre-move their way to winning the game by taking everything. So better, much better than everything else. Okay, on that note, I saw you were analyzing an endgame, I think a little bit earlier. And I remember you were asking about how you would kind of play it out. So maybe it would be interesting to talk about. How are we doing
like
on
where I'm setting my rooks is a big problem. Because I think my opponents are using their endgame rooks better than I am.
Okay, cool. Yeah, definitely like very important kind of thing to understand. I don't think I have the exact position, but it was something like this. You had like an extra knight and an extra pawn, I think.
And I was trying to work out where to set my rook so that I could begin pushing the pawns. Right.
So, well, let's just say having an extra piece in the endgame, huge advantage. And in most cases should be decisive, should be winning. The key thing I would stress here is that it's all about just being able to use the knight. Like if the knight is feeling useful, then it's just an extra piece and you easily overpower the opponent. In terms of where the rook goes, I would say on general terms, typically you want to target. So in this case, for me, the g2 pawn would be kind of like my main target because h3 pawn is, okay, defended by a pawn. It's going to be very hard to win. But the g2 pawn has to be defended by white's pieces. So I would try to like maneuver the rook and maneuver the knight so that they could try to attack the pawn together. And in fact, we really don't have to make a lot of king or pawn moves to win this one just yet. I would say the rook and knight should be doing most of the work. But let's play it out just to see how things could go. So I'll have you play black.
So just like conceptually here, like I know that the knight is a big advantage, and I need to like leverage that. But should my knight generally be going after the pawns or after the rook?
Definitely after the pawns, because your knight will pretty much never catch white's rook. It's just a much faster piece. Whereas the pawns are like they're fixed weaknesses. Now we want to be careful.
I can't do that.
Yeah,
no,
knight is no, all good. All good. Okay, so I'll try to defend. I'll give check.
Don't hang a piece. That's a good plan.
I'll try this one. So I'm just going to be trying to be like as annoying as I can as the defender. Not make it easy for you, but you still have enough material here to just completely overpower me. It's just a matter of, let's say, organizing everything.
Well, here I would just start bringing the king over.
Okay.
That's fine.
Okay, very good. So now black's one weakness is basically defended, and yeah, white's rook has little to do. Nice.
Oh. Hmm. Here, I would probably just panic and trade off the 2 pawns, but that can't be the best move.
Yeah, you're still definitely winning, even if you lose 1 pawn, but you manage to hold on to your last pawn, then you're still winning. But yeah, the kind of like typical situation, things go slightly wrong. Like you weren't expecting this move from your opponent. Very important to like try to keep the composure and recognize you're still winning. It might be a little bit harder than before, but all a matter of
knight g5, right?
calculation. I like knight g5, and then
if you take, I have a fork.
Beautiful, absolutely winning. Yeah, very nice. But okay, I'm not gonna make it easy for you.
I was going to ask if there's any benefit to like marching my king down here towards your rook if you keep doing these checks, but it kind of looks like I don't have an option.
That's right. Yeah, if rook is being pesky, right? You pretty much have to. Yeah. All right, I'll try this one. Good. Yeah, GG.
Okay, that was looking bad for a second there. if I don't go for checkmate there, there's no way to save that, right? I was so concerned about this double attack. I forgot to look for checkmate.
Yeah, let's take a look. So, yeah, at this point, it's kind of interesting. I mean, the rook and pawns, they can combine and deliver mate. This one would also be good with the same idea.
I was thinking about that.
Basically, like on king h1, you got to give the back rank mates. If we go back to this moment, so you played it absolutely fine. You're again winning the whole way. Like I never had any realistic chances. But I'll just show you a couple of ideas like to keep in mind. Here, okay, we had kind of a nice way to win with knight f3 check. Again, using the pin on the g pawn. And the point here is that it's actually the knight that's taking away some key escape squares. So the rook again combines to give a nice mate. But if we go back earlier, let's say one of the easier ways. Yeah, at this moment we were thinking a bit. So you found nice like tactical defense with knight g5 and then this knight f3 check. Another one would have been actually to use the pawn. I think you mentioned this one as a way of trading, but actually, since white's pawn is pinned on the second rank, you're just winning this one.
Right, yeah.
White just can't take it. So this would have been good as well. And here we're actually threatening to mate in two with rook takes pawn, king goes to the corner, and then knight will have one of two checks to deliver another mate. But let's go back a bit. As we put a lot of work in like moving the pawns forward and trying to like bring everything closer. But let's say, for example, okay, yeah, I made this move because, again, I want it to be pesky and I'm pinning the knight. You found one way to unpin, which is to help with the king. The other way would be to find a way to like move the knight so that your rook is defended, meaning putting your rook on a square in advance, let's say b3, where now you can make this knight move next. And the problem for white is that, okay, if they trade rooks, then it's really, really hopeless. As more pieces come off, having the extra piece is just so valuable. So let's say white has to get out of the way. I would say the simplest way to win this one is actually like use the rook and the knight to attack this g-pawn and just force white to defend it. So let's say we get something like this. Rook comes here. White tries to defend. Knight comes here. And rook g1. So this is where your like knowledge and practice of king and pawn endgames can really make your life much easier. Because a lot of players,
I should just trade these two pieces for the pawn and the rook.
Exactly. I mean, like, the engine might not approve. The computer might not think this is best. But when you're down to like 10 seconds, simplifying in this way is, I think, a very practical strategy. Because now you've got two extra pawns. You already know how to win, let's say, with if you just have one extra pawn. With two extra pawns, these endgames are really
trivial win, yeah.
And it's also like, we can also consider this almost like a pre-move win. Like, there's very little white can do to mess with you. Your king advances, your pawns advance, and at a certain point, you know, you'll have to calculate a little bit just to make sure that your pawn is promoting. But it's essentially very simple. Actually, one of my favorite examples when it comes to teaching is, let's say we just play this out kind of like the normal king and pawn versus king endgame. And let's say we come here, and then we do this. And so normally this position would be a draw if there were no other pieces or pawns on the board. But since you have this pawn, you don't even need it to like help, like by advancing it. You just need it to pass the move to the opponent.
Yeah.
So it's like a very, very simple win. And in fact, if the pawn was on the G file, it wouldn't really help your initial pawn at all, except you can use it as like a waiting move, and then white's king would have to get out of the way, and then our pawn promotes. So knowing that, like, yeah, so like if we feel confident with this one, then this is like a really practical strategy, especially when we're low on time, because yeah, you don't need 5 seconds per move here. You just advance the king, advance the pawns, and you win easily. Whereas the other way, if like we're playing this position and we're trying to like pre-move with king f6 and g5, your opponent might take advantage of this and play some move like rook to b1. You know, once they recognize that you're pre-moving, they make this move. You've already pre-moved g-pawn, and then they take your rook, and all of a sudden we're worse. Or even if they're not devious about it, you know, they might hang their rook by accident, which happens a lot. In time scrambles, someone plays rook b8 here just by accident. They're just trying to make a quick move. Then you also make a quick move, and then they're like, oh, it looks like my lucky day, I get to take the rook. Happens all the time. So this is the nice thing about simplifying, is that you really make your life easier. Okay, so how are we doing on time?
Yeah, not too bad.
Okay, cool. I don't want to work you too hard here. I feel like we looked at a lot of stuff. Do you have any questions for me on anything?
No. I think it's. I mean, I've followed everything that you've said. I hope I will. Whether I retain it all or not, we'll see. But I understand all the concepts.
Cool. Glad to hear. I guess, all right, some final parting words. Yeah, try to practice as much as you can. Chess.com/drills has a lot of these endgames that you can play it out against the engine, which I think is really good practice. We haven't talked too much about tactics, but those are pretty straightforward. Try to do a lot of puzzles leading up to the event to get yourself kind of like warmed up and in the zone. I don't know, actually, maybe it would be cool. I don't know if you've seen, you mentioned you were watching PogChamps 3, but yeah, watching previous events or rewatching some of the commentary might give you an idea of what it'll be like.
Yeah, I was planning to do that. I was going to watch some of the games and see if there's anything I could pick up from them.
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea. And you'll see a lot of the typical mistakes players make under time pressure. Very hard to avoid those ourselves, but hopefully we can learn from them and kind of use that experience. I'm pretty sure some of your opponents probably played in previous events as well, so you could watch.
Yeah, I think there's a few people that are coming back again.
Cool. Yeah, I'd be happy to discuss your opponents with you maybe off stream. I feel a little weird discussing them on stream.
Okay. I've got my opponents now, and I know who I'm playing against, so that would be helpful if you've got any advice.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll be. I'm gonna look through their games. I think I looked at one of them already, but yeah, I'll look through their games and see if I can offer specific tips. But I don't think these games are usually won in the opening. I think it almost always just comes down to the middle game, who has the better tactics, who puts their pieces on better squares, and then who's a little bit more composed in the end game and doesn't, do as many, have as many accidents.
Yeah, that's what I noticed in PogChamps 3. So I've spent most of my practice time practicing middle game stuff, just trying to get I think for the next couple of days, I'm going to focus a bit more on the openings and the end games just so that they're solid enough. But I think if I can kind of play better in the middle game, then that'll lead to a lot of wins. Yeah,
absolutely. It also might be now the time to start trying to, let's say, speed up a little bit in the opening. Because even with the 5-second increment, if you have a minute, but it's a complicated position, that's also not easy, even if you're winning, because there's still going to be lots of tactics to figure it out. So the main thing there is just try not to fall too far behind. But all right, man. Hopefully we get to work again. I'm feeling a lot of pride from helping you and hoping to to get you to win, which would be awesome. And
yeah, thanks very much for your help. It's been good. I think I'm confident with the pawn and king endgame, which definitely was bad. And it's good to be able to, when you made me play out the Rook and King endgame, I mean, I spent a decent amount of time doing the Queen and King, Rook and King, and then I spent 90 minutes doing 2 bishops and King, which was probably just a waste of time. But it's good to be able to repeat it a couple of days later and know that I've still remembered it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on the 2 bishops, definitely for this weekend, right? Probably not the best use of your time, but
yeah, I don't want to see 2 bishops ever again.
But hopefully you continue playing chess later on, when you don't have a tournament, coming up super fast. Definitely a good endgame to master beyond the Rook, because actually it's not too hard, but yeah, now you have to manipulate 2 pieces rather than just the one. Well, cool, man. All right, I guess we'll end it there, but yeah, I'll be in touch. We'll talk to you soon.
Yep, thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Have a good one.